Chapter 14. Revelation. How are you feeling? Are you okay? Any pain or... Zuko can't stop staring at her. Though the veil still obscures her face, her features are unmistakable. When he can see them, at least. He can't believe he didn't see it sooner. Her big, vivid eyes, the soft curve of her lips, and the smooth slopes of her cheeks. Zuko knows her. Even her voice is familiar. Her attempts at masking her voice do very little to conceal her familiar cadence. And now that he recognizes her, he can't stop remembering. He wonders why she, of all people, is here. Surely even the outer reaches of the Fire Nation must be a dangerous place for her and all her friends. It's dangerous enough for him, and he's the Crown Prince. Or he was. He's fairly certain that he hasn't been in line for the crown in 3 years, and he can hardly imagine that he's still a prince. And even if the title still belongs to him, he doesn't think he wants it anymore. But of all the places in the Fire Nation she could be, the fact that she's here surprises him most. Here near Shishoku, in this little cave, right beside him. She's been helping him, healing him for days now, and that is easily the most baffling piece of all this. She wouldn't have to be here. She wouldn't have to help him, and yet she's here. She has been here, night after night, without fail. And last night No, it's better if he doesn't think about that. That can't have been real. Amid all the confusion, all the questions, only one thing is clear. He can understand the reason for her disguise now. The disguise keeps her safe here. And as badly as he wants to seek confirmation, to lift her veil to prove that he hasn't lost his mind, he can't bring himself to even consider it. She doesn't want Zuko to recognize her. Though he can't erase the knowledge from his mind, he can still pretend that he doesn't know. Honoring her wishes is the least he can do. She's saved his life, after all. Can you hear me? He sees the frown through her veil, and she presses a hand to his forehead. Zuko swallows in an effort to quench his gravelly throat. Yeah, I can hear you. Are you sure? You're not acting like it. He manages a nod. He can't get caught up in staring at her like this, or she'll realize that something is wrong. He fixes his gaze upward. I feel about the same as yesterday. He feels her gaze sharpen. As this time yesterday, he quickly amends. It's barely past sunset now, and the wash of agony came well after dark. Just tired. And I still can't move. Her voice goes quiet. No pain? Zuko shakes his head. He can feel tension, can feel something huge and awful trying to claw its way out of that spot in the middle of his back, but for now, something holds it at bay. Not really. I'm not exactly comfortable being stuck here all the time, but... He finds his gaze drawn back to her and cuts himself off. She's trying. He knows that she's trying, and there's no use in complaining about something that neither of them can change. He allows his eyes to wander off. Maybe if she thinks that he's still a little hazy, it might help things. And it isn't entirely untrue. His thoughts are clearer now, but never in his life has it taken so painfully long for the sunlight to rouse him in the morning. Never has it taken him so long to recognize a familiar face. I'm sorry, he rasps. For what? For last night? Last night. He remembers arms wrapped around him, his face pressing against her shoulder. His face heats. He hopes that the gathering dark is enough to hide it. He isn't even sure that it happened the way he remembers it. There's no use in blushing over it. For everything. He puts all the force he can muster behind the word and hopes that it's enough to make her understand. She knows who he is. She knows how many reasons he has to apologize. Maybe she'll realize how deeply he means it. For a few seconds, she stares, and Zuko can see her lips hanging slightly parted. Like she's surprised. Like she's only a breath away from speaking. But then she shakes her head, turning pointedly away to rustle through her pack of supplies. You don't have to apologize for last night. You're injured. I should have realized that moving would make things worse. Zuko almost wants to push back, to edge a little closer to the truth. He means more than that, and she has to understand it too. Even if she isn't thinking about the mistakes that came before he returned home, she must know that everything means something bigger. Everything doesn't just mean crumbling into tears of agony. Everything doesn't just mean begging her not to leave. And everything doesn't just mean clinging to her, pressing his face into her shoulder until he fell asleep in her arms. He should apologize for that too. Even though the pain felt like it was destroying him from the inside out, there is no excuse for clinging to her like that. Especially now, he needs to learn to rely on her less. Now that he knows who she is, how deeply she despises him, he can't burden her any more than he already has. It's only a matter of time before her concern for him runs out. "You've eaten today?" she asks, all purpose again. He nods. He can't manage much. His stomach is still uneasy from last night's ordeal, but a little has to be better than nothing. It isn't as though he's using much energy lying here. Even a few bites will stave off starvation for a few more hours. And drank water? He frowns. Probably not enough. She gives a small humph before presenting him with a small bottle. You'll need a few drops of this. It would have been better if you'd had enough to eat and drink, but it's probably too late for that. His fingertips brush the textured base of the bottle. What is it? Medicine. She's trying a little harder to disguise her voice now, and he almost wants to laugh. Despite her obvious effort, she isn't very convincing. For pain, so that I can work on your back without sending you into shock. It strikes him that it isn't a very spiritual thing to do, offering medicine before a healing session. She doesn't really need to do things the way the spirits would, he supposes. She's human, after all. But it is strange to think that she has some kind of medicine strong enough to dull the nerves in his back. Where would she have gotten such a thing? And why? Unless it was after Ba Sing Se. Unless it was for the Avatar. His throat tightens and it's hard to swallow. A few drops. How much is that? She closes her hand around the bottle again and her fingertips brush against his. I'll help you with it. Don't worry, just brace yourself. I've heard that it doesn't taste very good. She's right about that. When the first drop hits his tongue, it's so bitter that he almost gags, and it takes a few tries before he manages to accept the rest of the dose. Whatever the medicine is, he hopes that it numbs his tongue along with the rest of his body. Maybe then the horrid lingering bitterness will go away. When he manages to stop wrinkling his nose, he looks up at her. So, what happens now? She closes the bottle and sets it aside. Now we wait until the medicine starts working. I can't heal you if it's going to hurt so much that you can't stay still. Zuko grimaces, and he can't be certain whether the lingering bitterness in his mouth bothers him more or less than the embarrassment. He should have been able to withstand the pain last night. This isn't the first time he's been hurt. This isn't the first time he's had to endure significant amounts of pain. Last night shouldn't have given him so much trouble. But he is still so weak as to be immobile, and last night was like nothing he'd ever felt before. Like something deep inside wanted to tear him to pieces. Still, his face heats every time he remembers curling into her, smearing his tears all across her robes. It's even worse when he remembers how warm, how soft and comforting it felt. "Do you know what's wrong with my back?" he asks, half hoping that her answer will be enough to silence the rest of his thoughts. She shakes her head faintly. "I'm not sure. Not yet." The artificial quality in her tone drops away again, and Zuko loses sight of her face amidst the folds of her veil. "There's a knot of energy wrapped up around your spine, and whenever I try to get near it, it pushes me out before I can find what the problem is. Last night, the knot broke open when you tried to move, and the pain just filled you up." He nods. That's certainly what it felt like. Like everything was on fire and being stabbed and crushed and torn all at the same time. "So, this time?" "This time, I'm hoping that the medicine will keep you from feeling so much pain when I try to get to the center of it. That's the only way I'll be able to figure out what's wrong." She lets her hand brush against his wrist, then pulls back. Unease settles inside his chest. What if it doesn't work? What if the medicine isn't as strong as she thinks? What if it dulls the edges but nothing more? It could turn out just like last night, except for the fact that she won't be able to stop even if he feels like he's dying. This time, he'll be as good as alone, even with her crouched right beside him. "Are you okay?" she asks in a whisper. Zuko isn't sure how to respond to that. The medicine is starting to blunt the edges of his thoughts and making it harder to form words in his mind, much less force them out. "I'm afraid," he admits when his mouth decides to cooperate. This time, she doesn't just brush against his wrist. This time, she grabs his hands and holds them tight. "You've made it this far," she says as the world starts to darken even further. "I'm not going to turn my back on you now." He tries to form another thought. Thank you, probably, but it escapes his grasp. He just barely manages to squeeze her hand in return before the world goes black. Katara isn't sure how she makes it back to camp. She's spent hours bowed over Zuko, hours picking apart threads of broken energy until she could finally reach the core of it. Hours more mending the damage, bringing the frayed nerves back together and fixing cracks in the bones shut. Hours torn between determination to finish what she's started and terror that Zuko might wake halfway through, that he might feel everything, and all her progress might be lost. But through it all, Zuko doesn't stir, and by the time she is through, she can no longer feel the whirls of energy spiraling outward from his injury. Whether that means that she's had any success or not, she can't tell. Even healing Aang's lightning wound after Ba Sing Se was nothing like this. What she knows for certain is that she hasn't slept so deeply in ages. Her own sleeping bag is strangely less comfortable than her previous night of sleep, but she tries not to think about that. She tries not to consider why lying wrapped up with Zuko came so easily, why it was so difficult to pull away, why it feels so empty lying here in her own tent. It's just the warmth, she tells herself. Just the human contact after so many days on her own. It can't be anything else. In any case, the exhaustion strikes her deep after so many hours of healing, and the sun has crossed the midpoint in the sky before her eyes finally open. Even then, she lies still for a long time. It would be easy to just stay here, quiet and unmoving, until the sun drops below the horizon or until she falls asleep again. But hunger gnaws at her insides, and after a while, she has to give in. She can hardly scold Zuko for not getting enough food or water if she neglects eating and drinking as well. Katara wants a proper hot meal, but the thought of lighting a fire, to say nothing of cooking, is more than she can confront. Instead, she rustles through her supplies and settles against Appa's shaded side with a few strips of jerky and pieces of dried ash banana. She isn't sure she'll be able to muster the strength for any further healing when she goes to see him again tonight. Visiting won't be optional. She needs to see how well he's healing. She needs to know whether his injured back has wrapped itself back up with the same kind of wrongness again. Even if she can't fix it tonight, she might at least be able to help him through the hours until she's ready to try proper healing again. But right now, the idea of leaving camp seems daunting, and she snuggles deeper into Appa's woolly leg, her meal balanced on her lap. "You're going to be a good boy and let me nap here, aren't you, Appa?" The bison turns his head a little and grunts, and she chooses to take that as a yes. Good. She yawns and begins slowly picking at her food. If there's one good thing to come of this unusual sleepiness, it's that most of the paint on her arms seems to still be in place, and she's still wearing her painted lady robes. At least when the time comes, she won't have to do very much to refresh her disguise. Just wipe away a few stray smudges of red and clean up the edges. She can manage that much. Even now, even exhausted, she can manage to clean up the worst of her smudged makeup to maintain her disguise. She needs the disguise now more than ever. The stronger that Zuko gets, the more dangerous it will be to help him. If he regains the use of his legs and realizes who she is, she shudders and nearly drops her piece of jerky. If Zuko realizes who she is, then she will have crossed a line from taking a foolhardy risk into actively endangering herself and all her friends. She really ought to know better than this. But the longer she keeps going back, the longer she keeps trying to heal Zuko, the less she wants to back away. She thinks she can see the good in him, or the potential for it at least, and she wants more than anything else to coax it out into the open. She wants to see him accept that goodness, and finally reject everything else. She wants to give him a chance so that he can make that choice. But she knows better than to think that she can coax anything, good or bad, out of anyone. People just are. Zuko is Zuko, and nothing is going to change that. But last night he apologized to her, and she almost thought that he meant more. More than just embarrassment over relying on her help. More than shame over crying in her arms until he fell asleep. And if he did mean more than that, then maybe she just doesn't know Zuko as well as she thinks. Maybe he's trying. Maybe there is hope. It takes a long time to push past those thoughts far enough to finish eating, but when she does, Katara dozes off and on throughout the day until she finally wakes up in the moonlit darkness. With a little more effort than seems reasonable, she fixes the streaks of red paint on her arms and gathers her supplies again. By the time she reaches the cave, her head has cleared a little, and she pauses outside for a moment or two. Zuko lies on his back, just like always, but she could almost swear that she left him lying on his side in the wee hours of the morning, too tired to reposition him after an exhausting healing session. Has he moved on his own? Is he regaining his strength sooner than she expects? She edges a little closer, and when she realizes that he's sleeping, she clears her throat. Zuko starts and blinks a few times before he manages to blearily focus on her face. Sorry. I tried to stay awake, but... Katara nods. She can hardly complain after she spent most of the day sleeping on Appa's woolly leg. Not that she plans to tell him that. He's supposed to think that she's a spirit, and spirits don't sleep. How are you? She kneels beside him and takes note of his diminishing supply of food and water. At least he's been eating and drinking. He takes a moment to think. I'm not sure. I think I must have slept most of the day. I can't remember very much. It makes sense to her. He must be exhausted, both from the healing and from the lingering effects of the pain medicine from last night. She hadn't expected it to strike him so hard that he lost consciousness. It was probably for the best that he wasn't awake through the healing session, but for all she knows, he might still be tired for days. And how do you feel right now? She prods. It's weird. Everything just aches. He pauses. But maybe that's a good thing. At least I can feel everything. Katara lets out a long breath. If he's regaining the feeling in his legs and he isn't in agony, then it must be good. The horrible, tangled energy around his spine must not have returned. Or if it is coming back, it's doing so slowly enough that she might still be able to reach the injury itself in a day or two when she's ready to heal him again. If she can heal him again. If she ever gets that chance. She lets her hand brush against his. It's almost too easy now, too comfortable to touch him for no good reason. She pulls her hand back. I think it's probably a good thing too. Her gaze slips down toward his legs, and she notices how uneven and twisted the blanket is around his ankles. Did you try to move? His lips press into a tight line, and he shakes his head. Barely. I rolled over so I could eat, but I was afraid to try anything more than that. By his pallor and the tension in his expression, Katara guesses that even that much strained him. That just turning himself over put enough pressure on his back that it sent shocks of pain through his body. She can only hope that it wasn't as bad as a few days ago. She nods and her hand brushes his shoulder. It's going to take more time. I know. Zuko takes a slow breath. His eyes close, and for a while, she thinks that he's fallen back asleep. There's nothing wrong with that. He needs the rest, and at least he's been awake for a little while. At least he's been able to speak to her and prove that he's recovering. As long as he's well enough to last another day, she'll have the time to help him. Katara twists until she's sitting parallel with him and begins slowly refilling his supply of food and water. Even if he's sleeping, she thinks that she might stay here until sunrise. Camp seems too far away, and there's no harm in spending a night here in the cave with Zuko to make sure that he's okay. If he can stay here night after night and day after day, then she can spare a few more hours too. It has nothing at all to do with the fact that he's lying off-center in his makeshift bed, and that the leftover space looks just her size. She knows better than that. Just because it was oddly comfortable the last time she fell asleep here doesn't mean that she's planning to curl up beside him. Still, she stares at the empty space beside him for a little while. The blankets look nice. She'll have to take one of the spares from the pile by the mouth of the cave so that she can rest without succumbing to the temptation of lying down beside him. Have I said thank you yet? His voice comes unexpectedly, and Katara starts. Her face burns, and she hopes that the veil is enough to hide her blush. He does not need to know that she keeps remembering how wonderfully warm he felt wrapped up in her arms. I don't remember, she admits. Thank you, he says. He sounds so soft, so earnest that she gets trapped in his gaze. For the 1000th time, she remembers Ba Sing Se, the soft, greenish glow flooding the caverns, and the gentle warmth bridging the gap between her hand and his cheek. She remembers the hope, the racing of her heart. She can almost feel it starting up again. Thank you for everything. I know you didn't have to do any of this, he says, quiet and slow, like it takes effort to speak. Like he's considering every word before he even tries to form it. I hope I won't have to be a burden on you for too much longer. Katara's mouth hangs open just the smallest bit. A burden? For all the effort she has put into healing him, she can't remember feeling burdened by looking after him, not even once. If anything, she hates the fact that she can't be here during the day, that she has to keep her face concealed. The fact that she can't do more feels like the true burden. You're not. Zuko, please don't worry about. She breaks off, heart in her throat when she realizes her mistake. No. No, no, no! She scrambles to her feet and staggers back toward the mouth of the cave. No. He isn't supposed to realize that she knows him. He's supposed to think that she's a spirit, or at the very least an odd stranger. This is all her fault. She's supposed to be more careful than this, and now she has no idea where to turn. All she knows for certain is that she has to leave. She can't stay here. She can't give Zuko the opportunity to recognize her. She needs to be anywhere but here. Katara, wait. She falters and looks back over her shoulder. In the dark of the cave, Zuko is nothing more than a faint, pale smudge, but she almost thinks that he's trying to sit. She isn't sure that she remembers how to breathe. I'm sorry. For everything.